Republicans are approaching this from a point of view as they want to move very quickly. I think Democrats would like to have some more time. They want to feel like they are part of the process, and they have their own ideas on what needs to be included. But even more than that, I do think there are a lot of senators who want to be involved that just haven't had enough time to digest the proposals that are out there or get deep on the technology. And so there is a learning gap there.
Let's get right to our first guest. I just mentioned that the government is still shut down, but some of the top digital assets executives were in Washington yesterday. They met with both Senate Democrats and Republicans to discuss moving the market structure bill forward. Joining us now is one of the executives who was in attendance, the president of the Solana Policy Institute, Kristin Smith. Hello.
Good morning, Jen. Good morning, Renato. Great to be here.
Great to have you on the show. We mentioned that you were in Washington yesterday. I know that you've said both sides want to accomplish the same thing. You call this rare. Talk to me about the common goals that you heard yesterday.
Yeah, well, the origin of this meeting yesterday is that there had been, I guess, some hurt feelings on both sides between the industry, between the Democrats, and even on the Republicans about language that would go about DeFi regulation in a way that is just unworkable. And so the purpose of this meeting was to reset the conversation around market structure more broadly. And as a result, the Democrats convened 10 executives to meet. We had 12 senators in the room who are interested in pro-crypto policy. And it was a really good conversation where different parties in the room got to talk about their top priorities and why we wanted to see this move forward. Similarly, the Republicans held one in the afternoon. Listen, I think that their market structure is not an easy road, right? Like, it's really, really, really important that we get this right, because this is going to be the framework where everything is regulated for years to come. But I do think the encouraging thing is the meetings had their intended purpose. The conversations are open. Everyone is committed to working to get this done. And now we need to go through the next steps of more education in the areas where the senators feel like they have a misunderstanding. And then also putting pen to paper and getting them to a point. So it's going to be a sprint to the end of the year. And if it goes into next year, I'm of a differing opinion. Like, I think it's okay. I think it's more important to get this right. But the important thing is everyone is talking again, and the discussions are back on track.
So, Kristin, there are some, I would think, encouraging aspects to the reporting that I've seen about these meetings. Obviously, at least 6 Democrats need to vote for market structure in order for it to get to the president's desk. There was more than that in attendance. 10, I think, at least 10 Democrats, from what I read. Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, also attended. Help us understand, because that's going to be key here. Where do you see the Democratic Party right now, and Democratic senators? Do you think that there is enough support to get market structure passed?
I mean, I think ultimately, yes, if we're going to get it done, we're going to need to have Democrats support the bill, right? You need 60 votes in the Senate. And I think we're only at 53 or so Republicans right now. And so, this is something where Democrats have to be at the table. I think Republicans are approaching this from a point of view as they want to move very quickly. I think Democrats would like to have some more time. They want to feel like they are part of the process, and they have their own ideas on what needs to be included. But even more than that, I do think there are a lot of senators who want to be involved that just haven't had enough time to digest the proposals that are out there or get deep on the technology. And so there is a learning gap there. And I think, listen, the industry, I ran the Blockchain Association for 7 years before coming over to Solana Policy Institute. There's been a lot of education that's been done, but this is, as we know, an incredibly fast-moving space, and we want to be sure that these senators feel comfortable and confident about where the technology is, so that they can get the legislative framework in place that works to keep the U.S. As a leader in this technology.
You mentioned that education gap. Can you tell us a little bit more, based on your conversations, where that education gap kind of lies? Like, what is the sticking point? Is it DeFi? Is it something else?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of two things. One is around DeFi and how that works as a technology. If you look throughout history, intermediaries are often the subject of regulation, and so they are sort of the tool that helps achieve public policy goals. So it's a little bit different when we're looking at these disintermediated systems where there are no middlemen, and so we have to think of different ways to achieve those same public policy goals. The good news is a lot of what we're looking for can be, is already part of these networks. I think there's also, maybe as a second issue, is around illicit finance. There is a misunderstanding as to what tools are available and how these networks are different, and therefore we need different ways to track down the bad guys. I think, if you look at the numbers, it's a lot less in the crypto space than it is in the traditional space, and so this is a good thing. But I think what happens is senators often sort of focus on their top areas of concern, and they're looking to an old menu of solutions when really we need to go into the kitchen and make up some new things to address any outstanding concerns. But the reality is the tools we have in the crypto world are better than the tools we have in the TradFi world. And that is a feature, not a bug. And we should continue to support the tools that we have.
So from my perspective, Kristin, the elephant in the room when it comes to market structure is, where is the Senate Agriculture Committee draft? That
Yes.
has been holding things up for quite a while now. And for our viewers who aren't aware, the Senate Agriculture Committee has jurisdiction over the CFTC. They're the ones who are ultimately overseeing the CFTC. So what is your understanding of where that draft is and when we're going to see it? Because of course that plays into the timing and the process.
Yeah, well, and I would say, there weren't many agriculture committee members in the room yesterday. There were on the Democratic side, but not in the Republican meeting. I think that the Senate Agriculture Committee is very much thinking about this, and I know that David Sachs, it was reported, who's the crypto and AI czar at the White House. He had meetings with members of the Agriculture Committee yesterday about moving this forward. I think this kind of comes back to something you were talking to earlier. There is a government shutdown going on right now. And so that means on the executive branch side, which includes the independent agencies like the SEC and the CFTC, they're operating with less than 10% of their staff. And so the technical assistance that the Senate Agriculture Committee needs from the CFTC to draft this bill isn't there. Moreover, there are fellows that have been detailed to the Senate Agriculture Committee to help craft this legislation. They are on furlough. This is very different than the congressional staff, by the way, who are not a part of the government shutdown because they're part of the legislative branch. So there is a little bit of a crunch right now in terms of the people who can actually do the drafting. And so I think that once we see the government shutdown end, which hopefully will be soon, it's going on quite long here, we'll have more technical assistance available to help them craft the legislation. But certainly I think the work is going on in the background. There's been, bills in prior Congresses, there's House legislation. They have a lot to pull from. But I do think the government shutdown is slowing down that process right now.
Kristin, you mentioned something earlier. You said it's not really a concern to you if market structure gets pushed into next year, as long as the legislation is right. Talk to me a little bit more about that, because we've had guests on the show that have said, if it gets pushed into next year, maybe it's deprioritized, and then maybe it doesn't matter if the language is right if it gets deprioritized. How do you kind of square those two things?
Yeah. So here's my thinking on this. And again, this is not in line with the rest of the industry, but I think, number one, as a former Senate staffer and as a longtime crypto lobbyist, I really want Congress to have a deep understanding of what they're doing. And, despite a lot of the effort that's gone in on behalf of the entire industry, I think there's still education that needs to happen. And so I think that that's an important piece of it. I do think, though, we have something going for us that we didn't have going for us in the prior administration. And that is the fact that the SEC and the CFTC, when they're open, which again, they're closed right now, but hopefully will be open again soon, they're doing a lot of thinking about what they can do within the authority they have to provide more clarity and more guidance. So if the SEC comes out and provides a pathway for token fundraising, and they provide clarity on what's a security versus a non-security. That's a lot of what we've been asking Congress to do through market structure. And so I think as they're continuing to work on these issues, it might ultimately be easier for Congress if they can leverage that work and expertise, and then they themselves can focus on the issues that Congress clearly needs to do, like spot market regulation or preemption of state laws, et cetera. So I think that it's in an ideal world, we will have a good, comprehensive, congressionally written legislative solution. But if it doesn't happen, I think, we do have time. I also think these are bipartisan issues. And I think, traditionally, as we get closer to an election, it gets harder to make a deal. But I think that as we saw yesterday in these roundtables, both sides really want to get this done. And so I think, in my opinion, that we have a little bit more time in order to get it right. But that being said, the sooner we get this done, I think the better the industry is going to be.
So I think the specifics of the ultimate bill that comes out of the Senate really matter. And there's a couple there's a couple things that I think are going to be important. One being the balance between the CFTC and the SEC in terms of primary regulator. I had earlier heard from folks in the industry they had a strong preference for the CFTC. That appears to have changed as of late. Also, the extent of preemption is going to matter because states are taking an increasing role. There's more bit license regimes and so on. Can you help us understand, where you see from your vantage point those two questions being resolved in the ultimate bill coming out of the Senate?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is one, I know you attended, Renato, that recently the SEC and the CFTC had a roundtable about collaborating on this going forward and harmonizing regulations. I think that kind of dialogue is really important between the two agencies, and hopefully will help provide a framework that is more workable for regulated entities. I do think, that spot markets are traditionally not regulated by the federal government, right? And so if we want to give that to the CFTC, that would be something new for them. If we want to give it to the SEC, it would be something new for them. So I think ultimately where that falls down, it doesn't necessarily matter as long as it's super clear. But one thing that the SEC Chair Atkins has talked about is this concept of a super app. And you want to be able to have one place where you can hold commodity assets and security assets and derivative assets all in kind of one umbrella. And so I think what's interesting is that I think a lot of the way we are going to interact through centralized intermediaries to access crypto assets or assets that have sort of crypto technology wrapped around them, it is all going to be in one place, and they're all going to be regulated by multiple entities. So I think, to me, the key is more the coordination between the two and the harmonization, as opposed to like who ends up with which piece.
Kristin, thanks so much for joining our show today. It was a pleasure. Thanks for sharing your insights from yesterday's discussions. We'll continue following the story, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.